Okay, so we'll start the second part of this workshop with Hélène Camouilly, who is Deputy Manager for Diversity Issues at France Télévisions when it comes to different broadcasts, different programs. So thank you for being with us today, so has to present the different tools and different outlooks also and what has been done in France Télévisions, the French broadcasting corporation. So please let us know when we need to change the slide. And then the three research fellows who have presented their work pertaining to the promotion and favoring of diversity in France and in Netherlands will ask you eventually some questions, and then we will leave the floor to the audience so they can raise any issues they may have. So, thank you very much. I see actually the ceiling rather than the students, so it's so anyway, so thank you very much for having me, for welcoming me during your colloquium. So that's much better. I can see the people now. And sorry for not being able to be physically with you. So, I will not talk about the different history, historical background pertaining to diversity. Grace, you mentioned the equality group, a collective group, which drafted a report pertaining to ethnic minority, and then the 2005 suburbs revolt, upheaval, which took place in 2005, and then Français, which helped all the French broadcasting corporations to provide a unity to the society at large. So France Télévisions, beyond all to its legal obligation, has a public service duty, so it has really a moral duty to talk to all the audiences and not excluding any categories within the French population. We must get all the people together and to watch us. We need to talk to each person, to each communities, but we must not split or divide the program so as to respond exclusively to a certain group or community. So we understood as we widen the spectrum of our audiences, especially when it comes to young audiences, we increased our audience ratings since we have more viewers watching our programs, but we also modernized our broadcasting and programs since we were able to respond more quickly to the expectations, and we had the ability especially to communicate on the internet more efficiently. So you tell me that seems obvious, but it is better when you say it frankly and openly. But looking at the last diversity barometer of the CSA, the French regulatory body, were not that good. When I say we, I'm referring to all the terrestrial broadcasting channel comprising both private and public TV corporations. And of course, this may speak to the young journalist to be here in Rennes. So this is, we do not talk to all the audiences, to all the publics. We do not talk to the disabled people. Disability is not represented enough in our programs. The best social categories represented in France are the people who have a high revenue and a high standard of living. So lots of people are not represented on our programs. So do you know that CSA has some white and does not white categories? The best represented categories and most dominant categories in both private and public services, 84% of the characters are white. So which means that not only we had to promote diversity, but we had to implement some tools and so as to measure our progresses, if there are any progresses. So you can move to the next slide. So we implemented different tools and we organized our networks. So these are the tools here. We are also organized as a network. Well, we've got a network of contact people in charge of different aspects of diversity. So what does that mean? People are both actors, stakeholders, but also a watchdog of the diversity policy within our different departments. And this network of different contact person in charge of promoting the diversity, enable us to meet once a month so as to make sure that we comply with the legal requirements, but also to propose cultural events which are not those people are used to see, which go beyond what people are used to see, dedicated to young people, and which widens the scope, really, of our cultural events we can see on our screens. And you can see a small example in the next slide of this, and that is an example of the cultural agenda we deliver each month during these meetings, and the contact person can actually make some proposal, of course. And we do know, and we have monitoring tools that go beyond the barometer of the CSR. The CSR barometer monitors only 2 weeks per year, so we have an internal in-house barometer monitoring the different themes dealt with in our program. So if we move to the next slide, you may see that we have a table, and on this table we list all the programs whose theme of diversity are those monitored by the CSR, social mixing, ethno-minorities, equal opportunities between men and women. So we fill that table on the basis of all the programs broadcasted by the different channels. And of course, we've got the embodiment of different characters. We do not have any ethnic statistic for our TV presenters, but we just want to highlight this when those ethnic minorities are embodied by a given TV host or presenter who represent a specific ethnic minorities or category. The idea is not to split or divide too far our categories, but we just want to see where the gaps are, where the problems are, and we want to diversify our offer. So it is the first monitoring tool. The second monitoring tool requested by CSR was to provide the presence of women in the broadcast. So not only the host, the experts, the presenters, but also highlighting and listing the programs which help to fight against stereotypes and discrimination. I'm sure you're quite aware of the On n'est pas couché program, which led to some very vivid debates. And we've got also a day dedicated to this type of programs on all France Télévisions channels. Usually it's on November the 25th, since it is a day pertaining to the violence made to women. And therefore all the France Télévisions channels then deal with that topic on that day. You know that when we do these programs, we broadcast, but we are also producers, and we've got an in-house production department. So we are the first broadcaster to produce TV drama and so on, programs, entertainment, and we've got some contracts, production contracts, in which there is a diversity clause, which highlight the fact that we are committed in the promotion of the diversity, but which also arouse producers to select a comedian so as to deal with themes pertaining to diversity and which allow us to move forward collectively. So we've got that type of tool. We've got also other tools which are of interest for the young public. Since with France 4 we can target the young public, and we sign along with the producer for animation, for cartoons, so that they are within the character of those cartoons as many men and as women, really. So an equal number of male and female characters. So this has been signed. And you know that a sentence or a phrase is often being repeated, and we listen, and people say, when we look for comedians different from the one we usually work with, and when we're looking for experts, once again, from different backgrounds, it's very difficult, and always the same one are there with the same opinions. So therefore we said, okay, we will create registers. So we created different registers, and I think I flipped through very quickly to the slide. So I ask you to go directly to the slide number 13. I went quickly indeed, but I do not want to make you lose any time. So this is a registry of experts, of female experts, actually. I don't know if you actually see it. Here it is. So we have our female experts. So this registry of female experts, we will started to work on an in-house registry, and we saw that this list of experts was quite long, so we shared the different resources and means with Radio France, and we asked a private third party to feed the database and to find a female expert in each field of activity so as to provide expert opinions in talk shows. We did exactly the same thing when it comes to the diversity issues, so as to widen our registry of experts with people from different backgrounds, living in different places, locations, different ethnic minorities, so as to enrich different viewpoints that can be provided by those people, and so as to provide added value to our program. So these are practical tools, and I'm probably forgetting some of those, but these are the main tools we are using. And in order to raise the awareness of our teams and staff, we will implement e-learning training so as to fight stereotypes, and so as to prevent and to fight against some homophobic or racist talks or words or phrases expressed by some of our presenters. It can exist, or some of our hosts or guests. So, of course, our TV presenters must comply with the good practices pertaining to these issues. So we've got a number of tools which have been implemented and that we did further in time, and this allows us to be a bit more precise when it comes to the diversity issues. So we had some good results, especially with regard to some commitments. where there is the Day of Women Day pertaining to the fight against racism, violence made to women. So we try to harmonize the different programs on those special dedicated day, and we've tried also to work on themes of interest for our viewers, and I've also sent you some links so as to view how this is actually broadcasted and how this is actually translated on screen, so it has to have a dialogue with our viewers. We want to have some dialogue platforms so that the people can provide testimonies pertaining to harassment at school and so on. So we've got a number of tools so as to deepen exchanges, the communication, further to some programs, news programs, TV drama, and so on. I don't know if you heard of Marion, Après l'école. That was a very strong and very emotional TV drama. We also had a TV drama called Ne m'abandonne pas, whose main actor was Marc Lavoine. And this TV drama explained how a number of people got into fundamentalism, and we therefore implemented a platform so that young people and the society at large could exchange about this issue. And we've got also different partnerships as to have the help of external talent. So thanks to competitive exams, so Alec Maric was one of our sponsorships. So one of the competitive exams was shoot your suburbs, your neighborhood, make a movie in your neighborhood. So we will take part in competitive exams such as Ciné Banlieue, movies in the suburbs, and then we'll be broadcasting the different production by young producers, 3 minutes format, pertaining to their neighborhood or pertaining to whatever they want to screen, to stage, and then we'll, provide some awards. There shall be 10 awards on our France Télévisions channel. So there's been some clear results over the last 3 years. So I've been quite quickly, I'm sorry, I've been quite quick. So I'm asking you now to move directly to slide 20, and you will understand what has changed in our in France Télévisions. So you can see that we have worked, first of all, on the first role of the police TV drama with Sheriff. Sheriff, well, the main character is from black, is immigrant background. Cain is a disabled character. Women on the front stage as well in those TV series, and we are working also on TV drama. TV dramas are the best ways to feature, to stage, diversity for the viewers. We have been awarded the diversity label, which is a French certified label that has been renewed in 2016, and we are working on having it renewed in 2018, since it is being renewed every 3 years. But we've set up a creation program so as to talk directly to the young people, the youngsters. I think dialogue is important, debating is important. So we're launching a platform with web series, documentaries, short format, 3, 5, 8 minutes on themes close to the heart of the young public, and we do hope that the young public, young audiences will watch more our TV channels and programs. So I'm moving now to the last slide. So that's the last opinion poll made for the terrestrial French channel. And if you can see it, we can see that we are not so bad in comparison with the private TV channels. So we're not bad, actually. Even though there are some progresses to be made, especially in terms of my diversity and diversity pertaining to the ethnic minorities. So we need to promote ethnic minorities a bit more. And I think this will come to term next year. And we shall see an increase of the TV dramas, access prime time TV dramas featuring main characters with different backgrounds, therefore featuring and promoting diversity. So these are the different tools we have implemented so as to make some progress on those issues. Thank you very much, Hélène Camouilly.
This presentation gives us an accurate picture of how the quest for diversity is being implemented, what resources, what measurements, what findings. I want to kick off with the first question, and then I'll hand over to others. In other countries that are working to have better representation of the plurality of their population, such as the US, there's been a direct link established between diversification of content and of editorial teams. It's good to hear about the trends that you've mentioned, but there's this issue of, in what you said there was mostly about content, though. What can you tell us about what you're doing to make editorial teams look more like the average French cross-segments of the French population? This is not just about improving visibility, but in terms of multiple experiences and perspectives on the part of journalists. Indeed, this is a very interesting question, and this is basically the fundamental aspect of the problem. There's an HR aspect, but also a diversity aspect. We did some auditions for anchors, for news anchors, and also for just presenters in general. And that was in 2011, 2012, and in 2015 in-house, because we didn't have any money left, so we had to use the regional and overseas department networks. I'm from Martinique myself. We had to use that network to look at this issue and enrich our channels with presenters from different backgrounds and rotate them between regional and national TV. So that was something I was responsible for. As for the recruitment of journalists, we've done a lot of work, particularly with panels and the French Institut of Political Science, to have internships and fixed-term contracts and then full-term hirings. We also there's the Bondy blog, which is now an institution. We work with them regularly, and some of the journalists from Bondy blog, we recruited a number of excellent journalists. If you look at France 2 evening news, they do a particular section in that. There's a journalist who comes from Bondy blog, so that's from a French suburb of Paris, a very ethnically diverse subject. So they bring their viewpoints, which was previously lacking, and which is now much better balanced. And that is also why we have got those people giving expertise on our channel must have different, diverse points of view. viewers are not consumers but citizens, so we have a moral obligation in that respect. Does that? I hope that it addresses your question satisfactorily. Yes. So we call that embodiment, strangely enough, and from there we've gone from multiple experiences and viewpoints. So I now want to hand over to other questions from the floor. Tristan Mattelart would like to say something. Thank you for your presentation. I was struck by the gap between your introduction on the survey of diversity put up by the French Audiovisual Council and the figures that you mentioned as unsatisfactory, and at the same time these large numbers of measurements taken at France Télévisions to attempt to to attempt to combat this. How do you explain that despite those measures across all the public sector broadcasters, the results, the French Audiovisual Council talked about the presence of white people, I think. How come we still have these unsatisfactory results? Does that? Well, I don't necessarily have the answer. This survey measures also private channels, satellite channels, so it's very much broader than just us. So it is not specifically for us. So it measures digital TV, so not satellite TV. So we basically agree here that there's not enough representation of society as you meet it in the street. So there's absolutely no comparison, in fact, and there we do need to work. For instance, I was rather troubled by the time I took part in a discussion in a producers' festival, and several producers said to me, well, we can't find actors from different backgrounds. And I remember that when my background is in journalism, and I've worked as a journalist for 20 years now. When I started in a school of journalism, many West Indians and people were saying, well, we can't find West Indian journalists. Well, I think that if you want to find them, you have to go and look for them. And look for them wherever you can, not just in TV, but also in other fields. Basically, people do the least effort. They go for the usual place. And more of us need to make more offers, which is why we've got these directories, work with producers and auditions with a number of producers. I've been working to offer auditions of actors from all backgrounds, and the more of us do that, the more progress will be made. There has been some genuine progress, but more needs to be done. Clearly, the viewers are telling us this, so we need to be able to do more. It doesn't just need to be a quota, it's a real work. The gender equality law dates in France back 20 years ago, and only 29% of women are MPs, so obviously this is a long haul. A number of politicians are only too well aware of that. We need to speed things up because As public service broadcasters, we play a role in social cohesion and combating discrimination, which is a vital urgency today. So there is a lot of work to be done in that respect, I admit. At the same time, we are not making progress fast enough, but a number of bodies on, for example, the Commission for Diversity in Media, the French National Centre for Cinema, etc. There are people working on this. And it's also true that presenters, actors need to be supported in order to have the guts to push the envelope, say, I'm here, what are you doing? Some producers, directors are doing that, which is why we've inserted this diversity clause that I was mentioning. Réjane, Sénac, I would like to ask you, other economists and political scientists have given some explanations as to why there is this resistance in the face of such apparent goodwill. One of the criteria, Francis Milewski from Sciences Po wrote a paper saying why equality policies are not implemented. One of the explanations was to say that we're always working in public policy sectors which sometimes were mutually contradictory. And I'll explain that as regards the media in a moment. You could have a instruction for equality, so the politically correct. Nobody is going to be against equality, particularly gender equality today, against discrimination. But when you look at family policy, in actual fact, it creates inequality by requiring women to leave employment when they had children, and that is in total contradiction with employment policy. So my question is that when you look at France Télévisions, as I do sometimes, and I listened to you just now, I hope you listened, yes, you see that you've worked hard, embodiment we talked about, on fictional content, Shérif Candisque Noir, and even series, so soap opera, Plus Belle la Vie, which really do affect stereotypes, combating homophobia and so on. However, don't you think that family policy and employment policy contradict each other? Similarly, if you look at variety shows, there are some presenters who I think embody everything except challenging sexism, and political debate shows where it really is not deconstructing stereotypes, but in fact staging stereotypes. And in the adverts, of course, there is things are going the other way. There can be contradictory messages going out with viewers who may have the ability to prioritize all this properly or not. And my question is about the coherence of this message, and when you say, for instance, that no women are capable of talking about economics, as proved by the well, I wouldn't say that, but this is an argument. Some people do say this, or that it's not a question of just counting how many ethnic minorities there are, but what they do and what they say. So this is a question of coherence. Well, I think there are several questions there, actually. Firstly, advertising, well, since 2010, we no longer can have advertising after 8 p.m., which is creating significant financial challenges for us. But of course, we are careful about advertising, but it's rather a separate issue, even if we now have some oversight on adverts. So now, what is this directory of experts about? These directories are focused on expertise. And we did this because we did a directory of women experts to show the scope of business and expertise of researchers, lecturers, who are available to these newsrooms and can be invited to comment. That is what this directory is for. And in addition, the French Audiovisual Supervisory Council has asked us to move forward, so we've gone from 28% of women experts, so talking about economics, politics, society, we've risen from 28% to 35% today at French public television. We should, of course, have 50 or 51%. If you want to be demographically correct, but that is 4 years' worth of progress. We need to keep at it, be proactive, and this is the point of the French Broadcasting Authority. They are there to goad us into progressing, and that's just in the field of expertise. We're not talking about presenters, people talking about consumer affairs, or no, we're talking about not about stories, but about expertise. Thanks to our own initiatives, as well as the French Broadcasting Authority's guidelines, and in newsrooms, we also have criticism or praise from the French Broadcasting Authority. So, honestly, I think that women on air, particularly in terms of expertise, we have really made a lot of progress. In many fields within the executive committee at France Télévisions is now got a majority of women on it. Our channels, most of the presenters are women, and that's true for all of the channels in the group. And for high-profile roles, there are a lot of women in them today. So, from that point of view, I think that we have really worked very hard. It's less true in terms of social and racial diversity. I think that perhaps, well, I may have forgotten one aspect of the question. Yes, well, for things like more fun shows, variety shows, if you look at Patrick Sébastien, for instance, well-known presenter in France, how on earth could you reconcile equality policy in general, and in particular gender equality, with the fact that Patrick Sébastien gets such prime time? That is why I'm asking this question of coherence. Well, honestly, there is a number of things to say there. There is coherence across our channels as a whole. We pay close attention to that, and when there are problems, we step in. And if we do not pay attention, well, the viewers do, and that creates a stir, a very loud stir. And as we've had recently here in France, that said, it's creative license, independent producers. We cannot erase everything, but we are looking very carefully at these hosts. Some things they do can be shocking, and in general viewers are very quick to respond to that, but we are looking much more carefully than we did before, even if it is not yet 100% satisfactory. And if this work is not done, well, the viewers do it for us very quickly in terms of when it comes to disability, women, homophobia. a lot of whistleblowing happens here internally. Another question from Jacco van Sterkenburg, who's a researcher specializing in the coverage of sport and diversity from the Netherlands, and has a question to ask you.
Yeah, hi, I do this in English. If I understood you correctly, then I heard you say that the number of women increased in your as journalist, or does it?
Maybe you can finish your question and then I'm going to translate, or is it finished?
Sure. No, it's not finished yet. Almost.
Okay, so make it short.
Yeah. So the number of women increased.
I don't understand anything. Sorry.
No English.
I don't understand anything.
Okay, but the another person will translate. Well, yeah.
Oui, je vais traduire au fur et à mesure, enfin quand on se passe un micro. Donc le début de la question était qu'il avait compris que le nombre de femmes avait augmenté. Women journalists or women in programs generally?
Well, I think she said that the number of women increased, but it's very difficult with ethnic minorities. So there are not so many ethnic minorities. So I was wondering, why is it more difficult to get ethnic diversity, for instance? Why is that specifically difficult compared to gender, for instance?
Okay. Donc, il a compris qu'il y avait eu un progrès dans la représentation des femmes au sein de France Télévisions, mais qu'il y avait la représentation des minorités ethno-raciales qui n'avaient pas suffisamment progressé. Donc, il voulait savoir s'il y avait un blocage. Enfin, qu'est-ce qui pourrait expliquer que l'un et l'autre n'aient pas progressé de la même façon?
Je vous entends un petit peu moins bien, mais je comprends globalement la question.
Okay, I think I've got the question now. The difference between changes for women, gender equality, and the relative stagnation of ethnic diversity. I think that there was more lobbying, perhaps. I'm not sure if that's the right solution, but women have lobbied more at government level, irrespective of the political party. This began many years ago, and I think in terms of ethnic diversity, there is still a lot of lobbying to be done, and perhaps more needs to be done. And admittedly, we must do this if we don't want to have a fully fractured or segmented society as it is liable to be today. Of course, I'm preaching for my own cause there, and I note that there are hindrances, obstacles. We have to find out what these are. So some progress has been made in terms of cinema, for example, in schools. Cinematography schools. Perhaps more needs to be done in TV dramas. We do have one which will be broadcast in 2018, which will, I think, I've already seen it, and it will feature outstanding black actors. It will have an excellent career. It's called The French Dream, so watch out for that. It's already won an award at a teledrama film festival. Jan Gael won an award there, already acted in one of our other series, and I think that all of these actors will break through because they are good. They have not been featured enough, but I think it will reveal exceptional young actors, and this should be more frequent. I don't have the solutions apart from the problems of our fractured society, and more research is needed to look at that issue more closely. Here is a question from the floor, from our journalism students. In your talk, you mentioned the work done by animation producers on female characters. They're often sexualized. And what about ethnic minority characters? Is there anything being done about that? So I think that this is a question about roles in animation. The French Broadcasting Authority is working on whether a role enhances a stereotype or not. We have done similar work to this about women in lead roles, to see whether these are degrading or empowering, whether women are represented as managers or police commissioners, or whether they are simply housewives with a very passive role. So we're looking out for that, and we are also tracking how those roles are portrayed. So this is really research. As far as I showed you the table with comments in the tracking table, where we look at whether the lead role is played by somebody representing cultural diversity, as we say. For instance, Sheriff is a commissioner, police commissioner from North African background. This is a very successful program, very good figures, ratings, and which is a positive role. And in how he has taken an alternative approach to doing his job, with attentiveness to various defendants and other characters. So roles are being rewritten. Another series with a black police commissioner. So a commissioner handling a whole team, a woman managing men, and also talks about her issues as a single parent with the problem of various other women's issues. So we are trying to construct realistic roles that have some grounding in reality, but are also roles that enhance these people. And so similarly, there are a number of series underway at the moment that in the months to come will highlight ethnic and cultural diversity, and that we are continuing to promote by and inviting lots of people and generally promoting these series.
Est-ce que j'ai répondu à votre question?
Bonjour. Moi, j'ai une question sur le lien que
My question is about the link that you often draw between the origin of individuals and terrorism. In TV news, they always mention the origin of terrorists, and this is not the case when we are not talking about Islamic terrorists. We talk about the fact that the person is mentally disturbed. So just repeating the question because there was a break in the transmission.
Que l'origine des personnes qui commettent ces attentats, alors qu'on ne le fait pas nécessairement quand c'est un acte terroriste qui n'est pas islamiste, on va plutôt parler de quelqu'un qui est dérangé mentalement, alors que quand ça va être Salah Abdeslam, par exemple, qui a commis les attentats, on va...
So, for example, Salah Abdeslam, immediately we was comment about its origins. It's the same in the film Don't Abandon Me. The lead role was from an Algerian background. So, well, in that film there were two families. They were from different social and ethnic origins. One whose father worked in an art gallery with Marc Clavoine, so Aryan male basically, who went off to fight in the jihad, and the other family, the daughter, was from a doctor's daughter, and she was a political science student who had been attracted to jihadism over the internet, and that was important because it's not just a question of deprived backgrounds or North African origins at the source of jihadism, because we know that's not true. So, Don't Abandon Me and other similar discussions that followed were aiming to address the criticism that you made, and there was quite a lot of discussion about it because this shortcut is being made increasingly, and I find that acceptable, this idea of judging somebody by their appearance, their racial appearance particularly. We are writing a lot of stuff to combat that. We really are.
J'ai vu le film Ne m'abandonne pas pour le coup, et je reconnais qu'il y a eu qu'on a essayé de casser certains stéréotypes, mais il y avait quand même d'autres stéréotypes.
So I saw this film that there were some stereotypes that were attempt was made to break them, but others were upheld. The daughter came from a good background, but there was still something about her origins. And when you come to news programs, how do you engage with journalists to address this issue and stop this link always with between the actions committed and an ethnic background? This is an interesting question, and our daily work is involved in that. I don't myself work directly. I'm not editor-in-chief, but I know that there are editorial conferences in which this discussion comes up, and they are very attentive to angle which is taken. The line which is taken with the subject is very clear on that kind of thing, but sometimes this doesn't work as well as it should, which is why we provide this e-learning on best practices to help them to acquire reflexes which are not always self-evident for everybody, and it's pretty much the same as for any other individual. I understand what you're on about, but we have a greater responsibility because we are vectors for these representations, and so yes, this is a real issue, and our partnerships with various local ethnic news organizations, etc. It gives us points of contact outside our organization, which is enriching, helps us, but more needs to be done. You are absolutely right.
Good afternoon. I have a question. Mrs. Sénac has asked if you let speak people who had non-appropriate behavior, and you said, well, you're careful about this, and when we do not do that, regularly we have bad audience rating. Not only audience ratings, but the viewers do react as well. So I wanted to ask this question. If we talk about the Sochi Olympic Games, Philippe Candeloro made some very sexist remarks, and the CSA then issued a warning to France Télévisions. At the time, Daniel Bilanéan, who was a sport director, supported the sportman. He said we're just an excess of enthusiasm, really. And when it came to the Winter Olympic Games of 2018, I think Philippe Candeloro once again will be a TV commentator, TV presenter. So I think he tried to react sometimes. Well, we try to sort these kind of things in the house, and we've been very strict and very firm in the house. So we had some internal debates, which must remain secret, of course. But I do hope, I'm sure, actually, that we now have a strong framework not to have such things being repeated, and not only for that, actually, but I do remember his comments. Yes, I do remember that. Okay, well, it's very good if you have some in-house debates and if you have an internal framework, but I don't think it was fair, not good, to provide a support to Philippe Candeloro at the time. Of course, Philippe Candeloro said it was all to do with political thinking. So, well, the management of France Télévisions took a stand. The sport director actually had a different position, and the management is different. At the time, France Télévisions took position and had a different position from that of the sport director. But let's be honest here, the strength is not only our strength. The strength also comes from the viewers, and when the viewers make their comments, it does lead to some consequences at our level. We didn't have the same tool in order to provide and to get the feedback of the viewers, of the audiences at the time, and that is very important for us. Of course, we must listen to our audience comments. Without them, we cannot exist. Okay, I would like to comment on the different programs and the fact that they are becoming politically correct in a way. What do you... well, I think I probably expressed myself badly. I wanted to talk about an harmonization. When we think or refer to a special event, for instance, fighting against racism, a special dedicated day, all the programs, all our channels try to broadcast programs dealing with racism. So probably I didn't use the correct term. We want to harmonize, not to be politically correct, really. And so I see if there are any other questions. I do not hear any other questions. You cannot hear us very well. Apparently, there are no more questions from the audience, so I just want to thank you on behalf of the organizers of this colloquium. So thank you for taking part into this colloquium. So you provided us with some of the debates that took place within France Télévisions, and thank you for actually shedding a light on different tools and you have been implementing. And thank you indeed for increasing the different representation of the different minorities and communities. So once again, thank you again on behalf of the organizer of the colloque. So Thank you. Again, in order to progress, we also need you. That's why I will keep in touch with you, with the EUT, and with the students especially. It's important to have your feedback. Having your feedback helps us to progress and to improve the quality of our broadcasting. So we are interested indeed in your feedback. So this is Beatrice. We agreed that you could visit us so as to deepen the debate, this debate with our students here at the EUT in Lannion, so that we could actually, deepen those questions offline, since we are actually online and we are being broadcasted. Of course, I would do so, and I will do so, actually. Yes, that will be my pleasure. Thank you.
Ok, alors comme on était sur une phase de questions, on va
so there were a number of questions, and we want to continue the debate now so that you can actually ask any questions to the different speakers pertaining to the first part of the workshop.
Alors, je vais poser la première pour démarrer.
So we'll ask the first question.
Ah bah non, je préfère laisser la parole.
Alors, c'est une question que j'aimerais poser à Réjane.
So, this is a question for Réjane Sénac.
Je ne sais pas comment prononcer votre nom, désolé.
But I've got also other questions pertaining to what happened with the sex story in CARISM Belbuena was interviewed by TF1, and he talked talked state racism, and he also highlighted the fact that his origin was mentioned very often, and he also said that if that happened to other people, maybe media would not have dealt with the issue in the same manner. What do you think about the comments he made?
Alors, je vais vous répondre en vous parlant d'un cours que je fais à Sciences Po.
Right, I'll tell you, I want to mention a training I'm doing in Sciences Po. So Sam is a white person, if we refer to the categorization of people. He's white, rapper, a white person doing some rap. So it's music which is usually associated with colored people, and we can therefore link sexism and racism, and we can see that rap is understood. There were no penalties. It was actually sentenced for hatred against women in the first judgment, but Orelsan said that he is not sexist, but he is responsible in the broadcasting, in the transmission of his messages. Okay, also in terms of freedom, there is a true challenge when it comes to what is the actual freedom of creation and what is the responsibility as a broadcaster when you are an artist or a sports person. So it is interesting to see that the management at the broadcasting companies think about this. What is it really contradictory with the main principles of freedom, fight against discrimination, incitation to hatred, and so on? The judge, in his second judgment, decided that he was not guilty. But in order to be brief, and the judge said that the young generation, that was the vision of the judge, and he said that for that generation, who is a bit lazy or frustrated, especially for young men, well, they need some catharsis, expression with things, so that there is that idea of freedom, of creation, in order to avoid the social explosion. So therefore, the judge thought that it was important to have areas in which people can express themselves, even though there was a discrimination against women in that case. And this was also racist aspects, since the judge thought that people from deprived area needed more that kind of expression. So this kind of motivation is racist. I mean, having this type of argument, I think, is quite a racist one. Justification now, the fact I want to talk about the Dominique Strauss-Kahn affair. The Dominique Strauss-Kahn affair was brought to the public attention, especially due to the US media. He was considered as a great economist, a great politician, French politician. Everything was accepting from him. He could have all the women he wanted. Women should be flattered when they were their prey. So this man, this white man, had rights on women and the right to have sex with them. That was considered as being normal at the time. So there is a cultural, social heritage to domination of the white man over other social group, and especially women. And that is less acceptable for other categories. And Serageni has done some work on this. The idea to trap sexism in the ethno-minorities, talking also the Muslim machist, but the Enlightenment have provided a shadow on women for centuries, actually. So I think this argument is interesting from an historical and theoretical point of view. But that does not mean, and that is not an excuse for what he did for. So this is not a narrative to exclude any justification on his part, but it is true that the way we will be judged, depending on our origin, will not be the same according to our background. So people are being judged differently on the basis of their background. So we are working here on intersectionality. So we're not categorized either as a man or the woman. We are a mix of both. And therefore, the expectations are different if you're a young, well-off woman, a young white well-off woman, or a young woman from Arabic origin. So that is interesting, but this also shows how this person does not accept any responsibility, but he is responsible since he has a public image and he does convey some values to the public at large, for the public at large. Tristan, you mentioned in your presentation the representativity rate of ethnic minority, but the reality of the representation in society, is it still stable or is it changing? It is difficult to say, since we do not have any statistic based on race or ethnic minorities, because the French Republic wants and claims to be united. And the CSA has a problem since they cannot correlate the statistic they produce with those that could be based on race. Cannot we have an approach, an understanding of those stats thanks to other research work? Well, probably yes, you can have a kind of understanding, but what we see and what is interesting in what this France Télévisions representative said is that the rationale behind those policies is that we need to add color in screens which are too white. So adding color is the motivation here. What also seems interesting in what is happening today is that there are some gaps and shifts between the efforts which are made in some sectors. Yes, indeed, in the TV dramas there has been some progresses, but not in other programs. The issue of women representation was also raised, but we could also raise the same issue for ethnic minorities. Yes, it is true that there are new commissioners in the TV drama, new police officers as well in the French TV dramas. So we are adding some color into the French stats, so we must have increased the number of characters perceived as being non-white, but at the same time, in the news programs, there are logics, rationale of a news production that, from a structural point of view, people are led to present those people from a qualitative point of view. So we represent those presentations in a form which will be based on stereotypes and which with negative stereotypes. So, in other words, the fact that we can change things on the sole basis of increasing the number of colored characters, we think we must have a more qualitative approach, not only a quantitative approach. We must also understand who are these colored characters. And if you're interested into the sociology of these colored characters, you will see that those colored characters are quite similar to the image, the public image of a given ethnic minority, and therefore we promote a very specific public image of ethnic minority, and by promoting this public image of some ethnic minorities, we do not promote others which do not fit with the ideal of good, so-called good ethnic minority. I don't think I answered precisely your question. There's no figures, but your response was very interesting indeed. Thank you. Jean-François Yena from the University of Lorraine. This may be a question for you all. If we consider the North American example, which at a very early stage has organized the visibility of non-white people, not only in sport, but also in TV dramas, with the results we know, when it comes to the social inclusion or integration of the different minorities. So do you think that the medias are a real power for the integration of those communities? Sometimes a Black American is summed up to a trait of character. An Arab is summed up to a trait of character. In the 60s, there were commissioners, police officers, barristers in the TV dramas. Having said that, that didn't provide any solutions nor any improvement to the actual communities living in the UK. So, how can we are there any relationship between the actual representation of those minorities in the media and their actual daily life, and if there are any daily improvements? So the question was for us all, the four of us. I think we must be careful with these issues of diversity because they actually hide or mask the actual phenomenon. So one of the one thing that masks the understanding is that all the debates pertaining to the diversity in the media tend to exclude thinking the thoughts about the structural reason and the rationale behind this. I cannot say how we shall do, but I do know what we should do. Maybe we should think about the structural reasons, which I think are in order to explain the differences between the improvement of the public image of women and these of the ethnic minorities. It was told that the ethnic, women have more powerful lobbies. In terms of then, she also said that this is linked to a certain French culture. The difficulty we have to represent ethnic minorities in France comes of our French colonial history and the way the French society is experiencing its post-colonial experience. So this is a macro explanation to your question. However, this micro explanation could be split or divided into micro explanation. So in 2004, there was a colloquium which was organized at the Arab World Institute pertaining to the diversity. It was the first colloquium about this issue. What was interesting was that professionals were invited, and a female producer working for TF1 spoke frankly, and she said, well, I'm fed up with this new speak about diversity. I will tell you how things were working at TF1 before 2000. When we came with a storyboard with black or Arab characters, the funding was refused. We just couldn't make the movie or the TV drama. So this is a structuring item. So now we're lacking information to know how things are happening at the editorial level or in the broadcasting channels. Things will improve, so since we can have some characters such as Sheriff or other characters, colored people, we must question not on about the mechanism which explain and which have explained for the last 17 years those issues at the CSA, Hervé Bourges understood and raised the issue in 1992. He had a first meeting with the Equality Lobby Group. So we've been talking about this issue for 17 years. How can we have more colored, so to speak, characters in the TV dramas? People now are more aware of diversity in the broadcasting companies. Things have changed, things are different, that is true, but obstacles do remain. But if we do not question the structuring obstacles, I do not think we'll make some good progress. I'm quite happy to move on and to comment on the structural problems. And I want to talk about my own research. I've tried to work on that void, and I've tried to see what was the change of visibility of the black people in mass media. And I wanted to have a long-term vision of 30 years, and I agree with Tristan that it is important to see what black journalism were able to do in white-dominant editorial offices, and I'm more optimistic than you. If you say that ever since the 60s, US news programs have integrated ethnic minorities, journalists, or gender or religion minorities, there is a true voluntaristic policy. Just to provide you some information to shed a light on what's happening in France. In France, we are focused on TV, and I do not understand why we are so focused on TV, but in the US, all the media were considered printed press, the radio and TV, of course, and it is first of all, the printed press, without any regulating body, the managing editor or the CEO of the press decided to include in the editorial offices journalists from ethnic minorities, so that the editorial offices are representative of the society, and therefore the presence of ethnic minorities journalists have increased dramatically, and we moved from 1% to more than 13 or 14% of black American people. That doesn't change the society, but I provide you with some example of this can change. And I interviewed a few American journalists over 30 years. They were able to modify some things. First of all, black American people are more visible, and that visibility is more positive, more normal. It doesn't always have to deal with problems in the society. So, for instance, a black person can talk about the prices of oil, just like a white person can talk about the price of oil, just domestic issues, really. Another thing is racism at large, but also the visibility of the higher class, the visibility of the politicians. There's a different media cover of the social revolts or upheavals, which were until then considered as a racial upheaval, which convey and translate the fact that it is a discriminatory society. So therefore, the diversification of the editorial offices, I'm just talking about the journalists who talk every day in the media, not only in TV. So who's making the information? If we diversify the people, we diversify the viewpoint and the experiences. Let's talk about the Katrina hurricane. And it is really self-explanatory because the French and the US position were quite different. Different photographies, one taken by the AFP, the French press agency, which is at the heart of the controversy. We can see some American people who are carrying food on their shoulders, and they are also carrying. Sorry, I will do it again. I will do it again. So we see a first photography with white people, white citizens carrying food and water, and the legend is the population is fighting to survive. The same picture by the AFP with black people carrying food and water on their shoulder, and the legend says, well, there is some looting. Looting is taking place in town. So, of course, people were furious within the editorial offices. There were enough black US journalists to say that this was not acceptable and that information was false and had to be corrected. Same thing for the young man who was shot, who was killed. Unfortunately, the media do not change the society; they just leverage to improve it. But having said that, when a young woman was killed by a Zimmerman, all the media has covered this quite slowly, but it's only thanks to the ethnic minority journalists that this was known from the greater public, from the public at large. So this is not a correction, and that does not worsen things. The fact that ethnic minorities are more present in editorial offices provide different viewpoints.
Oui, mais c'est une question. On a abordé
So we talked about ethnic statistics, and I wanted to know whether any of you, or all of you, think that this could become a tool that could be used to deal with representations in the media, or are things okay as they stand in France, in which no ethnic statistics can be legitimately gathered? There's been a lot of discussion about that, reports, counter-reports by various experts. The president of the Paris 1 Observatory of Discrimination. The debate has gone back and forth. I think that this is a fundamental topic which Derrida talks about in the policy of friendship. We are often required to live within dilemmas, and I think this is one. And my position has changed, in fact, in this dilemma. The dilemma is as follows: if the aim is to challenge domination, dominations that are anchored in categorization, the difficulty is that we are required to use those actual categories in order to subvert them. So I attach a lot of importance to justifying the use of these various categories, positive discrimination, compensatory policies, etc. This same resource can actually be subverted. And so, to answer your question, for me, if we think, well, individuals, irrespective of their personal characteristics, sex, gender, culture, religious, etc., have the same opportunities to have competencies and talents in a random manner, and that we have non-diversification of elites in the media, the economics, politics. This is not because men are more able to be reasonable beings, but it's because workers' sons are less gifted. It's not because workers' sons are less gifted than those of executives, etc. It's because all throughout their careers, people will undergo structural discrimination, be it direct or indirect, so that there will be inevitable choices, and we don't need some sort of tokenist logic to feminize elites to challenge all those structural discriminations. Otherwise, it's tokenism. We have anti-feminist women or racialized people who can reproduce stereotypes, and even in the answers, so Renaud has to be a good mother in that film. It can be a black woman, but it needs to be a good mother. In Sheriff, he has to be do his job differently, is what she said. So there's again this sublimation of difference. If the aim, however, is ultimately that these structural discriminations disappear and we are not differentiated, of course, each of us has our own individuality, but in the sense that it's not because we are stereotyped in our role. Similarly, when it comes to ethnic and cultural statistics, I was against because I was perhaps still in this myth of neutral universalism, and I thought it was rather playing dirty to do that. But at the end of the day, I've changed my position, reversed my position. I accept that it is a political fiction which produces domination, but we have to use it to deconstruct it. And this is not a question of complementarity. For example, this is, you use the tools that you have to deconstruct. The problem otherwise is that you cannot diagnose, and this is, the answers are quite revealing. In terms of gender equality, statistics play on gender, on sex, depersonalize and lead to more responsible decisions collectively and politically. Women don't succeed so well, but they have kids, they stop work, and some people provoke in that direction. So you may see the inversion of responsibilities like that, or you work on statistics, or group analysis, in which, strangely enough, instead of the women being guilty, as Rousseau had it, there is actually discrimination which is not their fault. And statistics allow the issues to be politicized and argued in court. And I think that through diversity promotion can work against that. Conciliation, mediation, as with Candelero, takes it out of the courts, whereas sometimes we should be going to court. Failure to respect law. And this is not a question of lacking a sense of humor or anything, but actually simply applying law. And gendered statistics have set precedents for trade unions and for women, because there have been group comparisons which, and it's the same thing in terms of race discrimination, because we have anonymous CV tests. So various bodies, some of which are not in the least far left, and this program shows that anonymized if you note that you are from a Catholic background or Muslim background, you have to send 4 times as many CVs to have a 4 times as many CVs if you are identifiable as being a Muslim. So we did the testing to prove this discrimination and show that this wasn't just some random feeling. I don't know if that answers your question. This subject is complex, but unfortunately I believe we have no choice, but we have to be very demanding and explain why we use these tools. A comment rather than a question in view of what we have just heard in terms of court cases. The idea that journalists from deprived areas should talk about these areas, etc. In this lab, there are enough researchers who have worked on court cases based on gender. It's a bit God helps those who help themselves. You're black, you need to talk about this. This is something we need to bear in mind. This ambiguity collectively about these issues. I'm a teacher, lecturer and researcher. I try to force myself against my culture and career sometimes to say that a student from a deprived neighborhood should not necessarily have to deal with subjects concerning that neighborhood. I was a journalist in a former life, and in a major regional daily, thus proving that we're not just talking about the major mass media, but some other local papers as well. This local paper recruited a young black journalist many years ago now, and said, "Oh, that's good because we needed somebody to go into the high-rise buildings and the housing projects." And since then, few minority journalists have been hired by regional papers. We have no statistics again. But we still need to bear this in mind when we're discussing these issues, because I have the feeling that we tend to think God helps those who help themselves. And if you think the journalists have to deal with subjects that reflect their own ethnic background, is the thinking which we have to combat sometimes. Well, I'll answer that, or I will answer. I think that's one of the big risks in this area. It's a bit the same dilemma that you mentioned just now. I have a similar Derridian dilemma. Diversification of content and connecting it with staff diversification is key, because that's a structural question. And how we diversify viewpoints, but the attendant risk is reassignation, reassignment. In other words, we will ask, so for example, in this survey I did, the big problem we had of journalists from minorities was to have them as recognized as journalists rather than as a minority representative. And they themselves in interviews were stuck in that because, and again, this is structural, a structural issue, how journalists establish an editorial line. In the editorial office, there was the idea of doing what North American journalists call race stories. And that was what these people were being asked to do, just as you said. And the fact is that they were recruited in the 60s because white journalists could not get into the places where there was race violence, non-racial violence, sorry, urban violence. So this is one of the recruitment factors, exactly as you just said. So the risk is that they themselves could become stuck in dealing with subjects that they didn't want to deal with, because otherwise it would be dealt with worse than if they did it. So most of them ended up leaving. The big problem in the States is that we have got beyond the issue of editorial diversity. Women can be seen as women and promoted. Journalists from minorities want to be considered as journalists and not journalists for minorities. So they could be, again, it's the same issue. But the problem is that of promotion, because there's the glass ceiling and they are writing stories in a different way from other people, more sensitively, but the problem is what topics do they get to cover and how are they produced and staged, formatted. And this is a genuine challenge, and we could mention Jacco. Stay with us, Jacco. You mentioned something very important just now, that is that there's this idea of diversifying viewpoints and messages and images, who the people giving the messages. There is also a myth to be deconstructed, which is that of the objective journalist. You mentioned that, Jacco, just now. I had a question written down about that somewhere, if I can find it. But there's contradiction between the mission assigned to a journalist, which is to be objective, and the fact that they are inevitably subjective. Jacco, could you perhaps say something about, do you remember you talked about the idea of journalists believing that they are objective and positioned?
So yeah, I remember that I said it. I mean, it depends also, of course, on the specific, let's say, domain that you're talking. So let's say news journalists, right? The news, they consider themselves objective. Sports media, on the other hand, is more like in between the entertainment and the serious domain, right? So that's it's a different genre in that sense. But yes, I mean, in sports media, what I think, because I talked about sports media in relation to this objectivity. What happens there is that I think the sports journalists, they have close relationships with the players, with the athletes, right? They have to do interviews, they have to get information. So they are not always taken that seriously by their colleagues from the news department, because they are just sport journalists. Well, at the same time, they earn much more money, but, right? So that's a bit of a paradox also, because they are well-known figures. So, but the thing is that these sport journalists are not always taken seriously because they are not seen as objective by their colleagues. As a result of that, they start presenting themselves as very objective. Yeah, we are very objective, we are really professional. But the thing is, yeah, let's say emphasizing your own objectivity time and time again, emphasizing your own neutrality time and time again, while on the other hand, research shows that stereotypes and prejudice does take place. That's a bit of a paradox, right? Or not a paradox, it's a contrast. It's a real explicit contrast. So I think that the fact that they consider themselves objective all the time doesn't enhance their self-reflexivity, right? They are not self-reflexive because they really believe they're objective, right? So and that's also the thing with this color blindness that I've just talked about. They consider themselves objective, but they also consider themselves colorblind. They say they don't see color, right? It's the same with what you were just discussing, like the statistics. You can not use statistics on different racial categories. You can not use it because you think that the ideal should be there's a colorblind society. We're all united, we're colorblind, so therefore statistics are not really appropriate. But the problem with that is that reality is not, really like that. I mean, there is discrimination based on certain categorizations, and colorblind racism exists, right? When people say they're colorblind, but at the same time they're racist, right? So it's so I think statistics in that sense also can really in the end can help. I remember that there was just one example from the sports world, and it's an interesting example. I'm not sure if it's been applied in the media sector. I think not, but it's an interesting example. It's the Rooney Rule. Maybe someone has heard of this. The Rooney Rule was implemented in the US, in American football. Researchers found out, because of the statistics, they found out at a certain point that there were, the vast majority were white. The coaches were mainly white. There were a few black coaches, but they were fired relatively soon. But then they found out that these black coaches that were being fired, they were not performing less, right? They were performing just as well, but still they were fired earlier than their white counterparts. So the researchers then made a case, together with lawyers also in the US, they made the case that this is unfair. And in the end, what happened was that this was brought to court, and it was a case against the National Football Federation, the NFL. The case was that black coaches were discriminated against because they were fired relatively soon and without good reason. And then there was this measure in the end as a solution. The measure was that every football club, right? So it's not a soccer club, right? But American football, that when there was a position in management, a vacancy, then the club owners, they had to invite at least one person from a minority background. It was not a quota, let's say. It was not like they have to hire this person from a minority background, but at least they had to search for someone from a minority background and invite this person for a job interview. That was all. So it was not necessarily to hire that specific person. And this was all based on statistics and quota. And in the end, what happened after years was that, more minority ethnic coaches got the job. So just being invited for a job interview, and you could say that the same perhaps could work in media, just being forced to invite someone for a job interview and once you get to know people, once you get to talk to people, the stereotypes are not there anymore, right? You really have to talk for an hour with someone. So it means that more black coaches were in the end hired and are successful right now. So this is kind of, a way to kind of use statistics and then use measurements, not really quota, but measurements to kind of, let's say, break this glass ceiling, because the glass ceiling did exist. And it kind of broke down because of this specific use of statistics and then a follow-up measure. And this is called the Rooney Rule. So it's kind of an interesting rule or measure, I think, which could perhaps be used in many domains like the media, just to kind of change something. Because I think many organizations don't like quotas. In the Netherlands, at least, when I use the word quota, media organizations, they don't want that. They don't want quotas. But if you tell them you should invite at least someone for an interview, but you don't have to hire this person, but you have to invite, then the attitude is more, okay, let's try, let's do that. And what you notice is once you invite people for an interview, you get to know them. The stereotypes don't no longer really play that much of a role. Maybe sometimes they do, but very often not. And in the end, this person gets the job just because the qualities are there, the competences are there, right? So that's kind of an interesting thing, I guess.
In terms of the notion of diversity in France is rather vague, in fact, because this issue is rather disturbing for those who are the most concerned in theory. Social diversity creates this very diverse France in every continent. France has had an impact all over the world, and that has brought something in France. So if a country must be united around these multiple origins, we should look at the issue of geographical origins, talk about old people, young people, two segments that are not very poorly represented in programs. The disabled as well are not well represented. We should be able to talk about social categories at the top of the pile, but also those at the bottom of the pile. We need all these components which make up an inclusive country, and we are rather a long way from that. Next question: what is the brief of the CSA? The French Broadcasting Agency is based on the 1986 Act, Article 3.1, incomplete, but says that we are to look at the proper representation of the diversity of French society, but just oversee. It's not define, it's this article, again, is full of holes, and we don't have the legal arsenal, but the French Broadcasting Authority has taken a 2009 recommendation on television and also radio and charters, for example, the Disability Charter. Question about diversity and how much influence the French Broadcasting Authority has on content, and how much that could have a knock-on effect on other aspects of channels, not just what you see on the screen. Indeed, diversity could be connected to PR, for example, on citizenship, but it may not function in the long term. I used to work for France Télévisions, and nobody told me that I had to frame someone in a wheelchair in a full shot, that we could use the skill of a disabled person to talk about nuclear energy, as is the case in our diversity observatory. No, we are stuck with stereotypes, and journalists themselves should be informed that they should not project stereotypes. In other words, people with the press cards, but also editors, in other words, the entire production chain. If the top of the company does not have these values and aspirations, it will never trickle down. That is one of the problems. I cannot, of course, disclose confidential discussions, but as soon as we have audition hearings at the Broadcasting Authority, I'm always talking about inclusion in French society. It's a bit of a one-trick pony. I repeat myself a lot, but since there's no progress, I'm still saying that. How has your career as a field reporter helped you? Well, this career as a worldwide reporter, I've seen all aspects of humanity: men, women, children, people who are despised, suffering, heroic, bastards. I've seen everybody, and I've above all seen my own life. I went to Reunion Island, where France has worked hard through education, which has made us aware of, has awakened our civil conscience. Not necessarily in families. They were very poor. They just basically wanted to survive and not talk about citizenship. But we learned through our primary school teachers, and because of our own roots. My own father is Indian. He had a different religion from my mother, from Brittany, and I learned that we were a bit different from our neighbor, but that he had the same worth as I did. And when I learned La Fontaine's fables, if I could do it as well as the girl next to me who had much more to eat, I was worth as much as her. So I believe strongly in diversity, and also in Article 1 of the 1958 Constitution, which says that we are all equal. Diversity, yes, unity, but unity above all.